Welcome to the life and times of Wilbur Maney. Born November 13th, 1927 in Hiwassee, Georgia. He's 93 years old, grew up in Hiwassee, worked as county agent in Rabun County, and currently lives with his daughter Deborah and her husband in Covington, Georgia. He's my dad. Dad, would you like to start off telling us a little about school?
Well, in the early days, there's a number of this small schools, and the lady taught the first through the third grade. A man taught the fourth through the seventh, and then I went on to high school, and you only had to do 4 years then, 8 through 11, and I graduated from it. I was lucky. I never missed a day of school in my life.
Who was your favorite teacher, would you say, throughout school?
Ruby Lloyd Bowers was my 8th grade English teacher, and she did the best job of any college class that I ever took.
I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about your dad. We call Papaw, but tell us a little about Papaw. When he was born, some of the nice things he did, like the basket you're holding there. Go ahead.
Okay, he was born in 1897, and he had one kind of a hobby that he took up, making small baskets like this, and I'm holding my hand. And when he was 90 years old, he made 20, and I bought all of them. I didn't want them to disappear, so I could give them to the kids, the children, the grandchildren.
Talking about Papaw, what kind of things did you do with him on the farm as you grew up? What's some of the chores that you would do?
First chore was picking up eggs. The next chore was learning to milk the cows. The next chore was learning how to plow and running everything that could be connected with farmer. By the time I was 12 or 13 years old, I knew everything about it.
And when you were growing up, your grandfather, your father's dad, was still alive, Milton Maney. You used to help him do work. Tell us a little about that, how far you walked to do that, what you did for him, how long you'd stay there.
Okay, I would walk 9 miles to his house, and I was about 14 or 15 years old, and I would go up there and start on Monday morning. I would gear up the team of mules, plow the field. Then what we had a double foot that we would smooth the ground with what you'd say, and then next day I would lay the 2 acres of ground off and get ready to plant the corn, go back and cover it with a double foot. You had to carry it because you didn't want to plant the corn too deep.
My dad was a wonderful man. He's a nice guy. But I can tell you this, he never shied away from a fight. I think I remember a story on the farm there about a bull, an encounter you had with Papaw's bull. Tell us about that.
Okay. My dad was in Ohio working, and I was left to take care of everything about 16 years of age. And I'd gone out into the pasture to lay the fence down and let the cows come in to milk, and the bull come in, and the bull got in front of the cows, and he began to paw, just picking his feet up one after the other, and I think to myself, I'm not gonna move, and are you gonna keep coming? And I saw a tree limb of an apple tree laying there, and when that bull got about 3 feet in front of me, I came across the top of his head, and I laid him down, and the only thing that I could think of, boy, what is my dad's gonna say when I tell him I killed this bull?
So you weren't obviously able to do a lot of travel back then. You remember any trips? What was the most memorable trip you made?
Well, it was to go to Franklin, North Carolina, because I'd never been more than 9 miles away from home. And this was being about 40 miles to see my mother in the hospital. And I was probably at that time about 7 or 8 years old. But I can still remember of us getting in that. We rode in the back of some kind of a Ford vehicle at around 39 or 40.
What was the first car you ever had?
First one I ever bought was a Studebaker, and they didn't last very long until they disappeared.
Who'd you end up passing that one on to?
I left it with my dad when I went into the Korean conflict.
All right. We talked a little about school. After high school at Hiawassee, you went on to college, is that right?
Yes, I did. I worked my way through Berry College and graduated there, and had much more and graduated there till I became I was teaching veterans farm training program. I was very popular with the veterans coming out of World War II, and I took sick. I called my daddy at about 10 o'clock at night, and I said, my stomach is hurting terribly. I was transferred my dad called somebody, hauled me to Gainesville Hospital, and the third day I developed a fever of 105. The fourth day I became completely unconscious. For the next 4 or 5 days I did not know a thing in this world. They tied me in the bed to control me. I came out of it. Dr. Burns says, if you live, Bill, it's only because God wants you to live. I've done everything I can do for you. And I survived it. I weighed 165 when I went in, and the day I was discharged, they put me on the scales. I weighed 127 pounds.
Wow. You mentioned teaching the veterans and that it was just prior to World War II. I know you went in the military after that, but tell us about how you missed World War II. What was the deal there? It was something you shared with us just the other day.
I missed World War II. One day, they sent us to Fort McPherson, and they made us pick up cigarettes. The draft went out at midnight. They put us on a bus and sent us back to Hiawassee.
So, you actually went in after that into the Air Force. Tell us a little about that, how long you were in and a little about it.
Okay, I went into the Air Force, took basic training in San Antonio, transferred to St. Louis in the Big Air Base there, spent a year in communications, and from there I was transferred to San Angelo, Texas as a private. In about 3 months, an opening on the base came up for promotion for the corporal. And my sergeant told me, "There's no way you'll get it." Well, in a week's time, I made corporal. Well, 3 more months or 5 more came up, open for sergeant. He said, "There ain't a chance in this world you gonna get that." And he sent it in. 2 weeks later, here I am, a sergeant. In 4 months, he came up for a staff sergeant. He says, "The guy down the street, there ain't no way he's going to send nobody in. I won't send your name in." But he said, "I would bet money that you would not get it." 2 weeks later, I was promoted to staff sergeant. And from that, I spent probably 6 months on the base at San Angelo. Everybody below me went to Korea. Everybody above me went to Korea. 2 weeks later, I told my fiance, Well, I'll be going to Korea next. No, that wasn't in the books. I was sent to South Texas, 2 enlisted people with 6 officers to teach cadets.
Wow. Dad's got 2 daughters, my younger sisters, Deborah and Ruth. And Ruth just mentioned something I wanted to ask you about. Something about who could hold the battery cables the longest. What was that about?
They had what we call it the training up in St. Louis, or at the base there, a thing what they call a potentiometer. And you would put 2 fingers, one on the negative side, one on the positive side, and then another guy, we'd put up money. Not a whole lot, because you didn't make money then. And we'd start at 10 volts, and here we'd go. And I got where I could hold it to 110, but some guy even held it to 120.
Well, all right. We talked about the military because you actually did go in the military first. But after that, after the military, you mentioned your fiance, so I wanted to back up to that now. After the Air Force, you went out to Texas, right?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
And I worked at a boys' ranch, but in the meantime, I was going to the First Baptist Church, and I met a young lady there. And the biggest thing that, as I can remember now, that for the first 2 years out there, the main thing I wanted to do was with a lady was inviting us to play cards out at her house. And I found out real quick she was really good at canasta. Well, I felt like I was as good as she was. And I made sure when we left, before we left the church, are you going to be my partner tonight?
Wow. So I know something else about her. What sport was she interested in?
She loved baseball, and probably the most interesting thing about baseball was I hadn't really considered even marrying her. And we were out at the Colts ball game, and the 7th inning, I can't believe I did it, but it's recorded on a piece of paper. The 7th inning, I turned to her, took her hand, and I said, "Wheedle, will you marry me?" She said, "Give me 2 or 3 days. This is shocking."
And I believe the truth is that Deb and Ruth found that ticket. Mom still had that ticket where she had written on there. What did she write?
She wrote, "Wilbur Maney asked me to marry him today." And right now, I do not remember the day or the month. But it was in the summer.
After y'all got married, you moved back to where?
Moved back to Hiawassee.
All right, and that's where you had your first daughter, right?
No, the first daughter was born in San Angelo, Texas.
Oh, okay.
And the thing about it, it had got so dry in Texas at that time, the ground just literally cracked at the big lake that they got their water supply. So the farmer told me that, Wilbur, I've got to let you go. Well, it just so happened my 2 sisters, 2 brother-in-laws happened to be visiting me in Texas right at that time. We need a school teacher in Hiawassee in science. Well, I had a minor in chemistry and biology and zoology. So they called the superintendent, tell him to come on. So I left. As soon as my daughter was born, I left there 3 days after she was born and flew into No, I drove. I'd bought a Chevrolet by that time, and I drove into Hiawassee, and she lived in with her aunt for about 10 months, and then 10 weeks, and then she came on to Hiawassee to live with me, teaching school.
So when y'all moved to Hiawassee, did you continue and further your education, like in the summer or anything?
Oh yes. At first, we would go on Saturday to complete to get into extension work. You had to have a degree from a land grant college, which Berry College was not a land grant college, and I would complete the courses. Then it got down to where that we both needed 3 courses, and my brother-in-law needed 3. So we spent a quarter at the University of Georgia, and the most amazing thing about it, during the summer, Bill, you was born then. I wasn't even at the house to see you born. I was in school, and my sister and myself called me at 3 o'clock. Well, you've got a son born.
So after I was born, I believe that was about the time you moved. Where did you move to?
Moved to Dalton, Georgia.
And took up a job with who?
Burl Scoggins.
For what was the job title?
Assistant County Agent.
Assistant County Agent. All right. And after that, another job came up over in Northeast Georgia for County Agent, right?
Correct.
So y'all decided to move from Dalton. Wasn't in Dalton very long, and you came to Rabun. Tell us a little about that, the job, getting a county agent job.
Well, I applied for an interview for it, and at first the person in charge of me turned me down, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, he called me on Friday, and he said, get your things together and be prepared to leave Monday morning for Rabun County, because you're going to become the county extension agent in Rabun County.
You lived we all lived in Dillard. I don't have the years. Deb and Ruth and this time at Dillard, they're born in there too, but I don't remember the exact years. So we had 2 more. I remember I was 6 years old, so I ought to be able to add that up, shouldn't I? But I remember I was 6 years old when Debbie was born, and so, gosh, that makes me 8 years old when Ruth was born. We lived there about 20 years in Dillard.
28.
28, that's right. You lived longer than I did. I was thinking of when I left. So in Dillard, do you have any other memorable experiences from Dillard you want to share?
The biggest thing, of course, doing all my work didn't really matter, because I guess I got into the bee business in Dillard, Georgia. I visited retired agents, and he was already in the bee business. He probably had 100 hives, and I told him I want to get in the bee business. So sure enough, we found the guy that didn't want the swarms of bees, and I bought the equipment, carried it over there and set it up. Well, I didn't think that this thing will really amount to much. Well, they swarmed, those 2 did, then I had 4. Well, from there on, my hobby was beekeeping on Saturday, and every Saturday on the week during the summer, I would be working bees. And before I left, I had 40 hives of bees, and I sold what they call sourwood honey all over everywhere. And the most curious thing about it was my youngest daughter, one day I pulled out one of the frames of honey on her, completely covered. These are 4 inches high and about 18 inches wide, completely covered with bees. And I called my youngest daughter, Ruth, out there. I said, come and hold these and let me make your picture. She walked out there and helped them bees. Didn't get a sting. I didn't get a sting. And that was amazing. We put that on the label that I sold the honey.
And that became the label of all of the sourwood honey jars that were sold. And it seems like it had a phrase on it. Do you remember? It came from a commercial back then. Do you remember? I think it said, "Try it, you'll like it." And if I'm wrong, Deb and Ruth will point that out to me, I'm sure. Tell us about, there's one other thing I know that happened up in Dillard, and that was when you got into gospel singing. You and Deb and Ruth. But tell us a little about gospel singing, what that's about and how you got into it, something.
Well, I had visited a church in the lower end of the county at Lakemont at an all-day singing. And I decided I really enjoy listening to these people and see how good they are. So from that time on, I got into it, and then my daughters had reached the age of about, Deb was 10, Ruth was 8, and we had got a guy to come and teach singing schools. So from that time, they picked it up. You just can't believe how quick, but they had inherited their ability from my father. My father had perfect pitch. He could hear a song in his ear, and he knew the pitch of it. He could tell you exactly what pitch, how fast it would be sung anyway. So we continued with the daughters till they graduated from high school. And they were so good that the oldest daughter was invited by the person that taught the singing school to join him and travel all over Georgia, all over Alabama and the Tennessee. But I decided I didn't have the money to stay in the hotels and what it involved. And but he didn't feel bad about it. But the girls then went on to Shorter College. One went to Shorter. Deborah did, graduated in music. Ruth went to Berry College, like I did, graduated in music. And then she went on to Illinois and got her master's in music. But Ruth became a choir director out in. That was kind of amusing. They told her, "We will listen to you, try you out a month, and if we like you, we'll keep you. If we don't, we won't." But they really just fell in love with her, and she directed a choir out there and sang. She would sing a solo every Sunday for about 10 or 12 years.
The one other thing I remember probably started up in Dillard was about hunting and hunting dogs. You kind of developed a liking with hunting dogs. You have any memories of those or things you want to share?
Oh, this would be too long
Okay.
to even begin to. I first had beagles. The most amusing thing was that these beagles would, on Sunday morning, we would be at the Baptist church up on the hill, and everything would be going real good, and it come time to pray, and all of a sudden you could hear them beagles across the highway running and run under a Methodist church, and you can imagine what it would be like to 7 beagle dogs barking and them things under a church and around and around.
And you got into coon hunting after that with coon dogs, right? I mean, for a lot of years had them. And that'll take us down to the next place. And I want to back up just a little bit. Mom worked at the post office. I know she left from the post office in Rabun Gap and went to East Denali. But tell us about what in relation to that, because I know Mom's job at the post office had something to do with you moving from Dillard down to Tignall. So what took you down to Tignall, Georgia?
I had been in Tignall and driving from Raven County down to Tignall, coon hunting. And I came in one time, I said, if Tignall ever comes open, put in for the job. We never even mentioned it again for 10 years. And she came in one day and said, well, Tignall's open. What you want to do? I said, I'm retired. I got nothing to do here except to finish up with my grandson in school, apply for it. And which she did. And she was named postmaster. So she would drive down to Tignall and work 5 days a week, come home on Friday and spend the weekend with me, head back Sunday evening for about 4 or 5 months.
And how many years did y'all live in Tignall? Do you remember? And that's fine if you don't, but I know I don't.
We stayed there 25 years.
Okay, and after 25 years, y'all moved up toward Atlanta area. Where'd you move to?
Locust Grove.
Up to Locust Grove. How long were you at Locust Grove?
I've been there, sir, I was there 7 years.
Okay, and that brings us up to today. You left Locust Grove, and where are you living now?
I live with my daughter near Covington, Georgia.
For your legacy, how would you like people to remember you? There's a quote I know that you mentioned before that you really liked.
Well, yes, there is. And this was written by a Quaker sometime after 1773. And I had found this thing in my early years of my life. And the theme of that poem was, I shall not pass this way again. So I would like to share that with you today, and the audience reading it. Many of you probably know this poem. I expect to pass this way or through this world but once. Any good thing, therefore, that I can do, any kindness that I can show to my fellow people, let me do it now. Let me not defer it or put it off, for I shall not pass this way again.
Our father loves music. He was a choir director for many years. Dad, you love gospel singing. Would you like to close with a song?
I am a poor wayfaring stranger while traveling through this world below. There is no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright world to which I go.